Washington has been more openly supportive of Taiwan in recent months. What is the intention there? And Oracle has reneged on a planned partnership deal with TikTok, saying the majority stake in the company should be American. Can WeChat's overturn ban hints at what will happen next? Welcome to The Points, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Qiuyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Now, tensions across the Taiwan Strait are escalating, with the main opposition Kuomintang Party boycotting the annual Strait Forum this year, compounding uncertainties. Meantime, Washington has been more openly supportive of Taiwan in recent months, as high-profile visits are made by senior officials to the island. In a series of moves it sees as necessary action, the People's Liberation Army carried out several military drills off Taiwan's southwest coast last week. So some say the mainland was, quote, flexing its military might and pushing Taiwan region to boost cooperation with the United States. So what's the situation now, and what will happen next? What is the role of the U.S. here? Well, joining me to discuss more in Beijing is Professor Wang Yiwei from the Institute of International Affairs at Renmin University, and from Shanghai, Professor Shen Yi from School of International Relations and Public Affairs at Fudan University. And also via Skype is Mr. Stanley Kober, former research fellow in foreign policy studies at the Cato Institute. Great to see you all. So let's talk about this. Tensions are building up across the strait. The military might being flexed amid a war of words. Let me begin with Professor Wang here. What do you think is going on? What has led to the current situation?
Well, we are in a difficult time. Particularly for the United States, in the presidential election, the Americans playing the card, Iran in China and Taiwan, and then thus they've gotten more intention and also shift the difficult scenario of the pandemic crisis, and then towards the crisis maybe in Taiwan, and make more troubles and test China's response. So that's the President Trump's presidential elections kind of tactic.
Professor Kober, is the United States trying to test China's or Beijing's red line here? What do you think is happening?
I don't know that they are trying to cross a red line. But as I mentioned when I was interviewed with you before, we have a belief in deterrence. And there is a sense that if we make our intentions clear, that the other side will back off. China is also saying the same thing, which is one of the reasons for the military exercises that you referred to in your introduction. This raises the possibility of a miscalculation. If everybody thinks the other side will back off, you could have a real disaster. And that is my concern here. What you mentioned about red lines, they could easily be crossed.
It is a concerning situation. And even under such a situation, the 12th Strait Forum were still held in Xiamen, China. But before the event, the Kuomintang announced its boycott of the forum this year, and its planned participant, former legislative speaker Wang Jinping, canceled his trip to Xiamen. So Professor Shen, let me bring you into this. Some say that with KMT leaders absent, the forum is being downgraded. What are your thoughts on this?
I think these KMT guys take a quite irresponsible speculation attitude to deal with very sensitive things. Taiwan Strait, the Taiwan issues is part of China's core interest. It's our red lines. And the mainland China is quite serious on two things. First, we refer to protect these red lines at any cost. And the second, we also try our best to pursue a peaceful reunification of this island. And what the conference held in the Xiamen is the representatives of our sincere and honest to launch a peaceful solution to realize this reunification. And KMT should be more serious and take more responsible on these things, and should not take too much political speculations on these things as kind of games.
And very interestingly, this year's forum carries on the theme of promoting people-to-people exchanges across the strait. But the KMT party pointed to the weak trust between people of both sides as the reason behind their absence to the forum. Professor Wang, to your knowledge, what are the sentiments among Taiwan's general public right now toward cross-strait relationship? And at this moment, how important are these people-to-people exchanges?
Well, the huge challenge of the pandemic crisis that's moved the globalization from, I think, to globalization. The global and the local are combined together. So that's the reason ASEAN being the #1 trade partner for China replaced the European Union in the past 16 years. So the cross relations also should be more intensively exchange. Particularly focus on the youth exchange and the cultural and the grassroots. Actually, for the United States, they have a so-called decouple strategy with China. They enforce the U.S. alliance, I think including Taiwan, the decouple from the mainland. So in this regard, I think that we should more pay attention to the grassroots cooperations and between the two sides, and also the user exchange. And that's very important for Taiwan and the mainland to for the global recovery from the pandemic crisis. And also, I think, focus more on the green growth and also for digital cooperations.
Now, the United States has been playing a role in this cross-strait relationship. Recently, we've seen U.S. Undersecretary for Economic Affairs paying a visit to Taiwan. This is following another high-profile visit in August, of course, by U.S. Health Secretary. Professor Kober, what exactly were the intentions there for both visits?
I think they were designed to send a message of the close relationship between the United States and Taiwan. And that gets back to the issue of deterrence that I mentioned earlier. If you know that we are firmly committed, the idea is you will back off. As I look at history, that doesn't work all that well. I agree with you with what has been said about the people-to-people relations. I studied in the Soviet Union during the Cold War days. That was transforming. I was delighted to see all the young people here coming here from China. That represents a lot of people-to-people trust, to see all the students moving back and forth. My fear right now is the deterioration is affecting these people-to-people relations. With regard to Taiwan, there's a very interesting article in today's Washington Post on Kinmen, the island of Kinmen, and how they look at the relationship with China and the people-to-people relations. And one of the people interviewed there says, it's difficult to point a rifle at a person with whom you've just had dinner. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the gist of it. It's the people-to-people relations.
But Professor Kober, with the U.S. election approaching, is it possible that the Trump administration is just playing the Taiwan card to stimulate his voting base?
I think it's deeper than that. I see this in a lot of my friends. There is a sense of great power competition, what has come to be known as the Thucydides trap. And the people in the foreign policy community are really very affected by this. I saw this even with regard to Japan at the beginning of the 90s, after the Soviet threat receded. We were looking for something else, and people were saying the emergence of Japan as the next great threat. Now it's shifted to China, but there's something about this idea of the rising power challenging the great power. It is, I think, deeper than the election.
Professor Shen, is also your assessment? I mean, how do you look at this? What role does Taiwan play in the regional strategy of the United States?
I think the United States tried to take advantage of these Taiwan Strait positions. First, to be clear, in 1949, when China wanted to finish its liberation wars inside China, it's the United States sending the 7th Fleet into Taiwan Strait and make this Taiwan province, which cannot be reunited to China since 1950s. Without the United States, there will be not such a thing named the Taiwan issues, first. And the second, the United States want to take a very blurred attitude toward these Taiwan Strait things, neither independent nor reunifications, so that the United States can have a lot of strategic space to keep a balance on both sides and take best advantage of these things. But from China's side, the reunification means the sovereignty, integrity of territories, There's the core interest of our countries. So I'd like to say United States need to recognize these things, even though we still a very asymmetric distribution of the power and the capacities, but the perception of this interest among the list of national interests in mainland China, in PRC and the United States are quite different. United States need to take a more practical attitude to face the reality. He cannot forever to stop the reunifications. And it will be better the sooner to find a more positive solution to get cooperation with China, to respect China's core interest will be better.
Now, I also got to talk about these military drills there. The PLA's military exercises around the Taiwan Strait are becoming more frequent, and the moves have been interpreted by some as a response of the mainland to closer U.S.-Taiwan contact. Professor Wang, there are also media saying that the move of PLA as big show of air power or threat of war. How are you looking at these claims?
Well, definitely. I think the PLA will use any of these chances to know about the Americans and the Taiwan's military deployment, particularly for the radar location, I think, because during the Cold War period, there is so-called the midline. Actually, that's, we think about Taiwan as domestic affairs of China, and there's no so-called midline. And it's very important for China to cross so-called the first lines of the chains, which are blocked by the United States as the first land. I think that's very important for China to go overseas. So that's the reason Americans play the card of Taiwan to separate the Chinese Yellow Sea Fleet and the South China Sea Fleet, to make China be more defensive. So, but now I think that's very important for China to go overseas. So that reason the military confrontation with the United States is more serious in this regard.
Yes, as you mentioned, Taiwan says the PLA pilots flew across the, this quote-unquote median line earlier. And in response, MOFA spokesperson Wang Wenbin said that the Taiwan region is an inalienable part of China's territory and the so-called median line is non-existent. Meantime, spokesperson for the State Council Taiwan Affairs Office also said that earlier the PLA military drills off Taiwan's southwest coast last week were a necessary action to protect China's sovereignty. Professor Shen, what's your response to China's stance here?
I think when Professor Cooper said deterrence, that's our action of deterrence. We send here quite clear signals. We will not allow this island to cross this red line, which means to damage the integration of the sovereignty and the territory of China, which will cross the line of so-called independence. And the United States should also get this signal quite clearly. If you not want to confrontation military in China in these regions, please respect China's sovereignty in this island, and please, it's your side to move back.
And Professor Kober, final question over to you. Given what has happened now, what will come next? And what are the prospects of the relationship between mainland and Taiwan? What do you think?
I'm concerned about where this is heading. Nationalism is an elemental force, I think, in human relations. You were talking about the unification of China. It's Chinese nationalism. We have now seen the emergence of a more Taiwanese identity. And I fear you could have a clash of nationalisms. I think we need an effort at some more creative diplomacy, some way to find some ties of unification, that could reconcile these two nationalisms, because otherwise I fear we could be headed for something very dangerous.
Creative diplomacy, whether that'll happen, we'll wait and see. Thank you very much. Many thanks to Professor Wang Yiwei from the Institute of International Affairs at Renmin University, and Professor Shen Yi at Fudan University, and Professor Stanley Kober, former research fellow in foreign policy studies at the Cato Institute. Thank you all.